Hello, astrology friends. My name is Shannon Gill, and I'm here this evening, my first time on the EA Zoom. I want to thank you, Linda, for inviting me, and Christina for referring me. I appreciate that. This is actually my first webinar. I've been on a couple panels, so this is exciting. So before I dive into my topic, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a certified evolutionary astrologer. I was trained with Maurice Fernandez. I did his certification program. Prior to that, I got a certification as a Jungian life coach and an archetypal therapist at Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado. And my concentration and my second passion, aside from astrology, is movement, dance, and art therapy. And so that was my concentration in my program at Naropa. And so I'm sort of learning how to work this program here. I've got to change slides. So a part of my passion is the integration of the metaphysics, the astrology, and the embodiment work. And a big part of my life when I lived in Boulder, Colorado was I founded an ecstatic dance community, which was named Rhythm Sanctuary. And it's where we got together and we, we kind of recreated ancient ritual and did some type of shamanic journeying with music and vibration and intention. And today I live in Austin, Texas, and I'm the director of a spiritual retreat center with my partner, Russell Olhausen, called Lotus Bend Sanctuary. We together have founded the Shift Foundation, and we create a lot of different programs, workshops. It's just basically in alignment with our astrology and our embodiment work and our ceremonial passions. And I'm also currently the president of the Astrological Society of Austin. I also am on the board of OPA. I'm the secretary, and I have a private practice. I'm also a single mom. Well, I say single. I'm newly divorced, I'll just say. And I have two beautiful children, Victoria and Weston. So I thought it would be a fun way to introduce my topic by sharing my chart. So I think that you might see right off the bat that there's a really strong emphasis here for me in this lifetime in the 8th house. And so you see there that I have my moon and Pluto and Libra, and then I have my sun, Mars, Mercury and Virgo all just crammed in there in what I like to call the house of shadow, sex, and soul. So and then of course the 0 degrees Aquarius rising exactly opposing the 0 degrees Leo. So I kind of consider myself a warrior for the soul mother, healing relationships through those deeper, darker alchemical processes of the 8th house and scorpionic modalities, of course, Scorpio at the midheaven as well, being a midwife of the Aquarian age, very instinctual, forging a new path and bringing forth some of these new teachings. So that's a little and a lot about me. So here today we're going to be talking about what's called the SYZYGY, and I'm going to go into that, and it's going to pertain to what I'm considering this new paradigm of intimate relationships and called the evolutionary paradigm. And so this is what we're going to go through today. This is the outline. We're going to look at the age of Aquarius and what this new energy is bringing in context of relationships. Of course, we're going to go deeply into the SYZYGY, which is all about this great time of union. We will compare and contrast the prevailing conventional paradigm with this new evolutionary paradigm. And we're going to dip our toes into my Doudna Tantra, which is a component of this new relationship paradigm, and which is also considered the inner reunion of opposites. And then we, of course, will talk about the astrology, and we'll look at the revolutions, the transits that are affecting this relationship evolution on the planet at this time. So let's get started. So the age of Aquarius. First, I'll just start briefly by talking about what is an age. I know most people might know what that is if you're an astrologer. If you're new to astrology, it is an epoch of time that's approximately 2,160 years that affects the development and the phase of humanity, politics, culture, social conditioning, and there's 12 ages that correspond to the 12 astrological signs. And the age is determined by the sun's location at the spring equinox, and the cycles actually move backwards through the zodiac, and this is known as the precession of equinoxes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the age of Pisces, which is the age that we've been in for this last 2,000 years, as it pertains to the material today of this evolutionary relationship paradigm. So there's definitely a strong energetic division between matter and spirit. So between the spiritual world and the material world. There was definitely a strong cultural emphasis on faith and religion, but it was predominantly dominated by hierarchy and power. And faith was based on something outside of the self. So icons, certainly Christianity, there was always a priest, often between you and God. And the key astrological phrase of this age was I believe. People, place their belief in something outside of them. As we look at the sexual ideology, it was definitely a lot of manipulation or a lot of repression during this time. And it was also forced in the way of dominance and belief systems. However, even though there was this polarity and this duality taking place, you see that the fish, the two fish swimming in opposite directions, which is the archetype of the age of Pisces, was still connected by the golden thread. So that means that this was actually just the perception of what was going on, that actually nothing has ever been separated. So the big question that astrologers, definitely debate is, well, when does this new age, this Aquarian age, begin, or has it already begun? And I think that for this matter, it's less important to try to determine a certain date that we step across that threshold. What we can just really try to feel into is sort of like, when do you imagine that the sun rises? When you see the first glimpse of that beautiful luminescent glow above the sunrise, the line of the horizon? Or is it when the sun actually pops up over the horizon line? Regardless of how you feel about this, what is undeniable is that we are very much entrenched in these new energies that are just rolling in like the waves of an ocean, of the Aquarian age, which we're going to look at now. So the Aquarian age, again, there's a lot that we could say about the Aquarian age, but in relation to my topic tonight, we're going to be looking at in connection to relationships and to the connection to the relation of the meaning of the Aquarian age, which ultimately is about the return to wholeness. So it's also been called the age of Yang, which literally means the reunion of the mother and the father. This is the reunion of the masculine and the feminine energies, which returns us to the state of the divine androgyne, which results in the rebirth of the oversoul, or what is known as the Purusha, which is the one consciousness, which what that does is that it creates the alchemy that returns the flow of the waters of life. This is the image of the waters returning to the earth. And so, Christianity might think of that as the Holy Spirit, or we might think of that as the divine elixir of the higher consciousness, the awakening, that it's free-flowing, and that we are all remembering and living in this state of unity. And just to touch on that before I go further, the differentiation between the age of Pisces of I believe to the key phrase for Aquarius is I know, is that it's about your direct connection to source that comes from inside. So when we talk about this new age, it's just like one of the zodiacal signs. They're broken into 3 decans. And so obviously the first decan of Aquarius is Libra, which has to do with relationships, the archetype of the lover, which brings us into the topic tonight. So the SYZYGY, I don't know if many of you are familiar with this term or this process. it definitely struck me whenever I was at the Archetypal Academy in Boulder when I was studying. And I will just go ahead and forewarn you, there's a lot of material from Carl Jung here, as I'm an archetypal therapist, and he's been a big influence in the way of this material, but also in my own life, in my own teachings. He was, you know, this very futuristic, you know, Swiss psychiatrist that just, you know, was left a mark in the field that paved the way for us understanding the collective consciousness, really tapping into understanding dreams. And he also came up with this understanding and developed a system of how we can start to engage ourselves in this process of awakening that's happening during the Aquarian age. So according to Carl Jung, the Aquarian, he developed actually and wrote a lot about this age. This is the age where man is reunited with his soul, that the oversoul re-embodies humankind. He also talked about this time with this transition from water, Pisces, unconscious, to air, enlightenment, Aquarius. He also pointed out that we're moving from animalistic, knowing that we're looking at the archetype of Pisces being the fish, to an angelic archetype, which is like the image you see here, or the water bearer, which again talks about this enlightenment, that the enlightened consciousness will come into the human form. And as I mentioned, he actually developed a lot of systems and process to help us to engage intentionally with this process of awakening. And that's what was so inspiring to me whenever I first found out about this concept, the SYZYGY. I think because of my own life path and the emphasis in the 8th house and Libra and Aquarius and all the things, is that it had to do with the that relationships actually could be a container for this process of enlightenment, this process of awakening. So to look at SYZYGY, what it literally means is yoked together. It also means wholeness or completion. Jung referred to it as conjunctio oppositorium. And it is the conjunction of the opposites within the human soul. So again, when we're looking at these components of the age of Aquarius, the age of the Yang, the integration of the masculine and the feminine, the mother and the father, returning us to a state of divine androgyne, this is exactly what Carl Jung was teaching. And of course, he developed so much material on the anima and the animos, which is about, you know, the internal masculine and the feminine, and the internal masculine, feminine inside of the man, the masculine, and that the integration within the individual was primary, but that we actually can work that process in relationship with another. So, and we talked about the divine androgyne. So what are some of the results? And we're going to get into more specifics of what some of the components of working with this, this process or the concept is, but some of the results, well, one relates to one of the 4 states of alchemy that has to do with the albedo, which is the 3rd state of the alchemical process, which is the spiritualization of the body through the integration of opposites. It also returns our vessel and our being to a state of original purity and receptivity to our own soul, which is another thing that he emphasized. And it also accelerates the process of spiritual ascension when we're finding that union of polarity. So let's see. Okay. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and start to look at some of the differences between the prevailing conventional paradigm and this new emerging evolutionary paradigm. So conventional paradigm, and I will just go ahead and say that there's no judgment on my part about conventional marriage, conventional traditional relationships. This is based on an evolutionary model of healing and waking up together and serving one another. And there's many marriages that last forever, and I absolutely am in support of that. But here are some of the components of a traditional conventional paradigm. Love, the components that bring people together: security, defined roles, most often monogamous relationships, not always, attachment, comfort, tends to emphasize a lifelong commitment, and it's the fairy tale paradigm in a way that, you know, we are fed this image even as children that Prince Charming's going to come along and sweep us off our feet and we're going to live happily ever after. And I think most of us have probably figured out that that is an illusion. And so we're going to go ahead and look at some of the shadow of this conventional paradigm. And this is an extreme, but I will say we probably all know many people that are in these types of relationships that are quite dysfunctional, but they stay together anyway. So here's some of the ways in which this contorted dynamic can express itself. Blame and projection, defensiveness and counter-accusations, dominance and submission, martyrdom, resentment, grudges, ownership, spiritual and creative stagnation is often the result, disloyalty, avoidance of issues that end up causing distance, fear of loss keeps people together, and eventually a loss of power, purpose, and spiritual growth can take place. However, there is a massive awakening going on the planet, and I think that probably most people watching this tonight are very tuned into this, which I feel like is really at the root of a lot of this this awakening going on about wanting more and really understanding the alchemical potential that we have in union with another. And this awakening is part of this Aquarian age about returning us to connection with our soul. And we're just going to review briefly the understanding of soul through the evolutionary astrological paradigm. It's the seed of immutable consciousness that travels with us throughout all the lifetimes. The function of the soul is known to have two coexisting desires. Well, it's part of the function, known as the dual desire nature. So there's a desire for the soul to have a separate existence from source, and then there is a return, there's a desire to return to the source of creation. And this polarity, or this back and forth, this interaction, is actually what creates the drama of our lives, but it also facilitates the process of evolution. So a lot of the separating desires are you know, motivated through the ego, right? So they're desires to find happiness or fulfillment outside of the self. So this can look anything like material gain, relationships, power, authority, experiences. And when on a spiritual path, eventually you will exhaust all of those external desires, realizing that that's really never going to get you home. And all that's left is the desire for knowing that which created everything is born. The desire to know source, the desire to know the truth of existence. And this creates divine longing, which is the catalyst for the spiritual path. So I mentioned I went to Naropa University in Boulder. Chogyam Rinpoche was the founder, and he says that chaos takes place in your neurosis, and it's the only home ground that you can build the mandala of awakening on. Which brings me to this new paradigm of relationships, the evolutionary relationship. Perhaps an elevated model of relationships may comprise partners entering relationship with the intention of serving one another, the relationship becoming a sacred crucible, an ecstatic alchemical container for the metamorphosis of the soul. So what we're basically talking about is that relationship becomes the spiritual path. Whereas before, the commitment was to the person with sort of an unconscious belief that they would bring happiness and fulfillment and peace. In this paradigm, the primary commitment is to your own soul's evolution. And so the devotion and the commitment to the partner then becomes to serve one another, to see one another first and foremost as divine and as sovereign beings, not to be owned. And the commitment becomes to serve one another's soul evolution. So it's not till death do us part. It's actually until the contract is over. It doesn't mean that this can't last forever. It doesn't mean that at all. But it does mean that if the soul growth comes to an end or is complete, that perhaps the relationship contract is over. So it's a sacred contract between two people to hold an unconditional space of growth and healing. There has to also be a deep trust to reveal vulnerabilities, the wounds and the imperfections, and to see one another. There has to be the ultimate level of trust to be able to see one another. It's often better than we can see ourselves, because by the nature of this type of relationship, it's going to bring up all the unconscious material, and we're going to get into that. So John Wellwood was one of the authors of many of my textbooks in Europa. I studied relationships pretty in depth. Know that what appears to be love for another is really love of the self, because other doesn't exist. So we start getting into some of these metaphysical understandings that really we are attracting one another from this metaphysical, energetic, vibratory level, because there's a resonance that is going to serve us the container as that which our deepest soul can evolve. And ultimately, you know, when I want to go back for that, when it says because the other doesn't exist, understanding that we are one unity of consciousness, so that really the love for the other is the love of source, the love of the one mind. So this is just another image, and it's just what it's pointing to is that this is ancient knowledge. This actually isn't necessarily a new paradigm. It's, you know, someone on Facebook said there's nothing new underneath the sun. I think that was Russell this week. And it's true, you know, we're always just cycling through. But just to point out this ancient Hermetic image of the Magnus Opus, known as the Great Work. So this is the rebus, which represents dual matter and the integration here again of the opposites within, the masculine, the feminine. It's got the image, the astrological images there. And it's also known as the divine hermaphrodite, which results in this SYZYGY, resulting in the cauda pavonis, which is the eventual one mind, the all-seeing eye. And then the last final stage of that alchemical phase is the rubedo, which is returning to a complete wholeness. Just a couple of more images, just understanding that the Buddhist and the Hindu, they all practice this level of relationship, and they call it relationship as carnal ground. And basically, and you see these images of dead people bones, you know, these vultures eating carcass. And it really does represent, and then that's what they say in a lot of the readings, is that this level of relationship is that crossroads between life and death. That is like some are being fed and some are being fed on. That there's something about the compost of the unconscious and the shadow that is absolutely necessary to go into in order to open up and to make space for the light of consciousness to come in. So how do we do this? So we're going to talk about two of the components. Obviously, we don't have a lot of time tonight, but one of them is just embracing the shadow. Another great quote: one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So what is the shadow? Well, it's the unconscious, denied aspects of the personality. So, you know, when you are unconscious of something, it's parts of yourself that you don't know. Usually you're in denial of, or maybe they're repressed because of severe trauma, and it's a way that you protected yourself as a child. And they show up in the way of our wounds, our complexes, neurosis, addictions, reactions, obsessions, insecurities, roles that we play, fears, shame. Carl says, to confront a person with his own shadow is to show him his own light. Okay, so now we're going to break this down a little bit and talk about the shadow, which is the hidden realm. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So the shadow, again, are the unconscious aspects of the personality that have either been repressed or that we've disowned ourselves out of shame or guilt or fear. So they show up in our relationships as our wounds, our complexes, our neurosis, addictions, obsessions, insecurities, shame. And basically, most of these components are rooted in our childhood experiences. Here's another great picture of Carl. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less that it's embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens. So I just want to share a brief story about my life that I find quite amazing synchronistically. After I graduated from Naropa, I went on a pilgrimage to Mexico, and I was going to backpack down there for a year. And the long short of it is that Spirit called me to Mexico City, which was the one area that I planned on avoiding. And I entered into a ritual theater company, and they were doing a production on transmutation, which you saw my chart. My life really is about alchemy and transmutation. So it felt like it was very much this sort of interdimensional initiation. And I was the angel of destiny. And we took 13 participants at a time on a boat, blindfolded, to the island in Mexico City. If you're not aware, there's actually an island. They call it the lungs of the city. At night, made them sign a waiver that they would transmute their darkness into light. And we circled them up at night in the forest and buried them to their knees in holes while we did a ritual of helping to guide them through a journey of embracing their own shadow. And this is the quote that we read to them at the end of the performance. We took them into this hollowed out old ancient several hundred-year-old tree, and we the bruja, the witch, part of one of the characters that was channeling this information, read this quote: "He who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakes." And they took the blindfold off, and that was the end of the journey. Really, really a surreal part of my life, but it just pertains to this material in the sense, and my own work, and how, I guess, passionate I am about helping to guide people into some of these realms. So where does the shadow originate? Our traumas, our past life, disapproval from parents, a lack of flow of love, judgment, trauma. And basically we just shove all these things into a bag, or we dissociate from them in our psyche to survive. So what ends up happening whenever we grow and we evolve into adults, very naturally, we start to project our shadow onto the world. Again, according to Jung, the shadow is instinctive and irrational, and it's prone to projection. Anything that we perceive as imperfect or inferior is recognized as moral deficiency, is often what we're going to see on the outside. And so if we think of ourselves as interconnected in this energetic web, there is no separation between self and other, that whatever is going on, whatever energetic story or distortion or judgment or pattern inside of ourselves is what is going to be played and what we're going to see in the drama and the play of life. And of course, in relationships, this really becomes predominant. And that's where we come up with this concept within this new paradigm of relationship called the sacred mirror. That actually we're signing up for this whenever we commit to this level of work. That just the very nature of this devotional metaphysical, higher level of relating is going to invoke that. And we're actually inviting that. Because again, we've already agreed that we're here to help each other evolve and that we trust one another to hold a wide enough bandwidth to be able to see through the drama, see through the reactions, see through the stories, and even bring a little bit of humor, which can be helpful at times. But this to understand that the partner, through this vibratory field that you're sharing, is going to be reflecting these unhealed parts and these unhealed wounds. Hallelujah, right? Because what we're trying to do is to clarify and to refine the vessel so that we can allow ourselves to open to more higher conscious light, love, experience, joy, which is our birthright. Joseph Campbell, known for The Hero's Journey, has done a lot of work on this. The cave which you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. Through embracing the shadow that we actually make space for the light. So this is bringing us now to the second component of this relationship paradigm, and it's Doudna Tantra, which also has to do with the unification of opposites. So just again, briefly to revisit evolutionary astrology and the sexual intent and the purpose, is the soul understands that it can only go so far alone. And so in order to evolve beyond the separate self, whenever we move into this archetypal domain, we understand that it's through that alchemy that the ego can let go, that it can dissolve. And that the merging of the opposites can transmute the darkness into the light, and huge transformations can take place, and we can actually begin our journey home back to source. So we're just going to briefly visit what is sexual energy before we go into any of these practices, because one of the areas that we're trying to heal at this point in evolution is this very deep misunderstanding of sexuality, that it's not just a genital experience for pleasure. It is actually the creative life force of the universe. It is the energy of God. It is the energy of consciousness. It is the bringer of health and vitality. It's a catalyst for transcendence. It's got many names all over the world: chi, prana, elan vital, mystical fire. I noticed a misspelling there. My apologies. So it is, yes, there is definitely the orgasm, and there's the pleasure principle, but it's also the smile of a child, or the flowering of a rose, or a masterpiece by a painter. Sexual energy is the spark of life. So the ancients knew this, and there was no separation between flesh and spirit. There was no separation between matter and the spiritual world. And there were very intricate practices that were involved in this process, that were in place, that were very deep and intricate. And that's where we get into some of these Doudna Tantra philosophies. So basically what Tantra means is sexual union. So again, you're seeing this connection of all the themes, right? The SYZYGY is the integration of opposites of masculine and feminine. It's the same thing with Tantra. It's also part of this new paradigm of the Aquarian age, returning to this state of the divine androgyne. So all of these components are rising at this time for a reason. So this sexual practice, it has to do with sexual union, but it also has to do with reverence and devotion, and with breath, and with posture, and with asana. And there's many, many kinds of Tantra. But when we're talking about relational and sexual, it's the Doudna is the specific branch that we would be looking at. And it's intended to expand the consciousness, again, through activating the alchemy, which catalyzes the Kundalini to awaken. So we're going to look at what the Kundalini is, but basically whenever it awakens, it fuses our reconnection to source. And it is through the path of love and pleasure, which is a beautiful part of this equation, but it's not the end all. So the Hindu creation parable of this my Doudna Tantra is the Shiva and Shakti. You know, the Shakti was the goddess of all creation. It is the life force that we're talking about. And Lord, so that's the divine feminine, right? And the Lord Shiva was the God consciousness, divine masculine, and that he was asleep and he was meditating. He was internal. And that is representing, you know, the illusion of the separation of source. And Shakti danced, and she danced her sacred sensual dance, and her longing for this union invoked, finally seduced Lord Shiva into waking up and opening his third eye. And you see there that all of life was born. And that is symbolic to the Kundalini Awakening. So what exactly is the Kundalini? So again, it's this universal creative life force known as Shakti that lies dormant in the body. We all have this energy. We are all divine creators and connected to source, but we are living in this state of dissociation, basically. And so it's often represented by a snake, which is coiled at the base of the spine, which is why, you know, we think of Scorpio or the 8th house as representing this type of sexual alchemy. And it's considered the primordial energy. It's also known as the mystic fire, the cosmic power, and it manifests as the higher consciousness energy. So what exactly is this Kundalini awakening that we're talking about? Again, it's when the fusion of opposites, the merging, catalyzes this divine spark, and it activates the chakral system. You know, many people are aware of the chakras. So they are actually these energy portals. If we think about ourselves as vessels between the earth and the sky, it's the chakral system that connects us. Whenever the fusion of the opposites sparks, the pineal gland opens like a lotus flower, and the Shakti awakens and begins to spiral upward through the center core line, which is known as the Sushumna. So this is not something that just happens necessarily overnight. This takes a lot of practice. This takes a lot of devotion. It doesn't have to take a long time. However, it's something that should be revered. And there's very intricate teachings on this that should be honored. So what's happening through this catalyzation of the sacred energy, it's returning us to the connection with the divine, is that the ego and duality dissolve. So the separate sense of this sleepwalk that we've been in wakes us up and energetically become unified. So heaven connects to earth and true realization occurs. One final quote: the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. So Carl Jung was just very ahead of his time here with all of this work. So now we're going to talk about the astrology, and we're going to look at the connection of some of the more recent transits that I feel are affecting and catalyzing this relationship evolution. So the Pluto-Uranus square, I really feel, was sort of this time of acceleration of awakening. You know, it's certainly, we can look at the initial conjunction in the 60s where the seeds were planted, right? But really and truly where we came to the crossroads where people were making the change, or maybe the change was forced upon them, was during this period of 2011 to 2016. I think that there's probably nobody on this call that hasn't had life-changing experiences during that time. Basically, we're being pulled in opposite directions, right? Pluto drawing us down to the underworld to face our shadows. Uranus pulling us up into the higher worlds, trying to encourage evolution. So this polarization was creating sudden and dramatic changes. All of the systems, internal, external, our government, all of, of course, Pluto and Capricorn, were starting to just dissolve. And so we were forced out of old patterns through chaos and crisis, and it really accelerated our evolution. So this is really where I see a major leap in the collective awakening that's been happening, and people actually owning it, and not just having it be a concept or an idealism, but making the changes in their lives. I love this image. So now we're going to talk about Jupiter. Jupiter transited through Libra September 2016 through 2017. So I just really started noticing in my practice a major shift and reorganization going on within one-on-one relationships. People were waking up out of these marriages that were confined or limited, or where they were maybe selling themselves short, or they just weren't in alignment with what was coming through, which is this deep longing, this spiritual longing to, it's almost like that itch where you know that there's something more, but you can't put your finger on it. And if your partner wasn't growing with you and wasn't on the same path, I saw a lot of people jumping ship, because Jupiter moving through Libra was expanding the dynamics, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So there was a real awakening to the patterns that weren't moving, and people were just wanting more. So, you know, we know that Jupiter clears the way, opens doorways through often bringing loss or change. And so we saw many endings, and people really just choosing this new level of spiritual relationship and really having these peak experiences. You know, I really met so many people in Austin and Boulder, and really through the internet now we can see that this is a collective shift going on, that we really understand that we have access to higher dimensions through the alchemy of intimacy. So then Jupiter, of course, transited into Scorpio October of last year, and where we reside now just for a little longer. Shadow, sex, and soul, as I like to call, as I said, the Scorpio realm. So what I noticed was that then the work got deeper, the path got more profound, the emphasis on shadow work increased. A lot of the unconscious patterns and wounds were really, really emerging. The focus on sexuality was really in the field, still is in the field, and the whole spectrum, right? The shadow collectively with the Me Too, also within relationship dynamics, people really just unearthing their own sexual wounds. I mean, gosh, most women that I know have been sexually molested on some way, in some level in their life. And I also have become aware that this ancient knowledge of Tantra has been piercing the collective. And there's a lot of just novelty around it and misunderstanding and misuse, I will say. And that's why I really encourage people to do their homework. But I also encourage people to trust that this path can actually reveal itself to you. And that with reverence and devotion and intention, you can be self-taught and you can be self-guided throughout embracing some of these components that I've been talking about, which is devotion to one another's alchemical transformation, through self-responsibility, through the shadow work, and through you know, some ritualization around the sexual nature, the sexual process. So we have to, of course, talk about Uranus and Taurus. May 15th, I believe it was, it entered Taurus. And so what I like to call this alignment is electrified embodiments. Very, very exciting time. So of course, Uranus, you know, the lightning bolt of heaven in the hands of destiny, being thrown down into the Taurus earth, and most specifically, due to our content tonight, through the vessel, through the body, through the sensuality, the sensual nature, this electromagnetic energy of the heavens descending down through into the earth realm. So what I see happening is this clearing of the channels, a real acceleration of the opening of the light body. I'm also aware that there's been a higher level of anxiety that I'm seeing as a theme, as we're trying to figure out how to metabolize and to burn off closure. So this is with the intention of expanding our vibratory field and to increase our capacity to be able to be in contact with this higher knowledge. So if we think about light coming through, light is information, light is knowledge. And so this is why it's so important to clear the vessel. And there's other ways to do it, but for this, program tonight, we've talked a lot about emotional and psychological clearing, but it also has to do with the purification and the health of the body, of toxins, and eating, clean and high vibrational food. Because what we're really being called to do is to open up the light body and to radiate at this higher level of vibration. And so couples practicing Tantra can definitely feel an acceleration on this process of expansion due to this alignment. And ultimately, we can become transceivers of this cosmic energy from earth to sky. And when enough people are open and running this energy of light, which is joy, it's love, it's connected to truth and higher knowledge, being in the flow of the synchronicity of the universe, we actually can raise the collective vibrational field simply by being in our own energy and being open and awake. And so this brings us to the current astrology of 2018, where we stand here with the Mars and Venus doing their every other year retrograde dance. So we have just finished up this very intense summer that many of us will not forget, with Mars retrograde in Aquarius, back to Capricorn, June 26th through August 27th, with the blanketed by the 3 eclipse season. Very, very intense and transformative time. And then, of course, we're right at the cusp of this of Venus. It's the counterpart going to do her review and reevaluation. So here again, it's like the themes are just repeating themselves. And it's like on this level of evolution, we get multiple opportunities, and we don't heal all of our wounds at once, and we don't evolve all, with one just bold leap. So there's these repeating themes, and, it's often 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or vice versa. And we do a little bit of work and we get to experience, the freedom and the synchronicity and the joy of that. And then it's just another layer. So this Mars retrograde in Aquarius, we were definitely reevaluating the divine masculine energy. The masculine is trying to heal itself, and to find what this new masculine looks like, which is the integration of the divine feminine within the masculine soul, right? So there were just many themes around this. And there was also, there's always going to be relational themes in, looking at freedom versus independence versus codependence, all types of alternative relationships, looking at Aquarius as well, looking at, some of these different paradigms, and also looking at our drive and our will. And is that in alignment, relationship balance, questions about commitment versus non-commitment. I feel like there's this, there's this rub going on between the epochs, the ages, of trying to break forth, like the birth canal. It's bloody, and it's like, oh, but I want to stay in here. It's so comfortable. And, we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's some of these components of history that are worthwhile, that we want to preserve. And so we're all just sort of trying to find our way. But this summer was definitely a huge leap in breaking out of repressive relationship patterns. There was a lot of breakups. There was a lot of breakups and getting back together. And, this Aquarian relationship paradigm, the SYZYGY, was definitely surfacing about some of this material. Even if you don't know these concepts, these are some of the energies that were presenting themselves. And so just, right when we're finally coming out of the shadow here, we're going to be entering the Venus retrograde. And in Scorpio, and of course back to Libra and then back through Scorpio. So this is going to be, repeating some of these themes that we've been working with. Because again, it's too much, you know, to heal all at once. And we also, some of us that are doing this deeper healing work, we're collective healers. So we also have to realize that when we dip down into our own pain, sometimes we are touching into the collective pain body, and it can be too much. And that's why we don't need to do it all at once. So, but one thing to prepare yourself for, in my opinion, is that this Venus retrograde cycle might be quite intense and touching on some of the deeper material that has been, you know, in the field that you've been working on for the last year with Jupiter and Scorpio, and some of the things that, you know, maybe haven't yet fully unraveled. So it's a time to slow down. It's a time to bring consciousness to these areas. I think that it's important not to ever think like, oh, I'm past that. You know, the healing process is cyclical. However, we're spiraling upwards, but we will tend to touch those places in ourselves, but we don't necessarily have to be back at the same place that we were. So be gentle with yourself. If some of the old pain or the old wounds, or, you know, when we're talking about Scorpio, it's fear of loss. This shadow is jealousy. It's obsession. You know, there's a lot of intense emotions running high during this time. Power themes, you know, control and all of those. And sex life will be under the microscope. But again, you know, this is an opportunity to go deeper, to do some of that alchemy that can come through with embracing the shadow. So I invite you to take some of this material and really get intentional with it. You know, really that the light wants to pierce the shadow, and you can actually bring some of these painful parts into, by following the pleasure principle, into your sexual relationship. So that actually can help to move things along with a little bit of lubricant. So my last quote by Carl Jung: "The self then functions as the union of opposites and thus constitutes the most immediate experience of the divine, which is psychologically possible to imagine." We actually are living in a time that is extremely exciting, that we have everything that we need to be able to experience the vastness of the universe, the interconnection of all of life, to live in a state of union, to live in a state of joy, to heal the planet through love and through relationship and through creativity. And it doesn't have to be a solo journey, and it doesn't have to be necessarily always a painful journey, that we can look towards our love relationships and the people in our lives. And I'll also say that some of these concepts can be practiced with conscious relationships within communities as well. You know, there's a lot of conscious communities arising on the planet, which is also part of the Aquarian age. And also with that understanding that, again, these microcosmic collections of people are coming together for a purpose, for a higher purpose, but also to serve each other psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually, to do what we do, to project and to reflect, to take ownership, to heal, if they can enter into these relationships with consciousness to serve one another. So, oh, okay. I didn't remember putting this in. When the powers of the divine masculine and divine feminine unite, the gateway to the garden opens and all of the worlds within. So that's really, you know, the crux of the Aquarian age, is that a time to return to the inner knowing, the inner connection, the direct connection with source, the gateway to the garden. So thank you so much for listening, if you listened. And if you're interested in finding me, I have a private practice. I work with couples, I work with individuals with a lot of this material and all types of the issues that can come in the way of our ascension process. There's my website, also my retreat center website in Austin, Texas. We host a lot of retreats here. We also host other teachers. So if you're ever interested in coming down to Austin, and we would love to host you. We have a sweat lodge, and we have a labyrinth, and everything is placed in a very direct intentional line on the property of the chakra line. So we do a lot of energetic work. And there's our Shift Foundation, Russell and I's nonprofit. I have some events coming up. There's my sweetie. So we are going to be speaking for OPA in November and taking this material a little deeper and focusing on the sexuality of the Aquarian age and looking at some other components of sexuality also. And that is November 3rd, and it's a free lecture. You can find that on the OPA website. And then I actually do a lot of women's empowerment work. We're really living in a time where we have to own our divine feminine. And I have a workshop coming up here in Austin on October 20th, if you're local, at our sanctuary, in honor of the Queen of Heaven. And we're going to be inviting the embodiment of the divine feminine through sacred dance, astrology, and my partner Natalie Cutsforth, who's this incredible psychic. She's going to be teaching divination and helping to unblock the sexual chakras and teaching how to connect to your own divine feminine source. And I'm going to be giving archetypal divine goddess readings, and so you can know what your archetypal lineage is. And then my most exciting offering is that I'm taking a group of women with Natalie also again to Greece, to Crete in April. And this is really a dream come true. We're going to be creating an initiation going into some of the ancient temples of where the goddess reigned. And we're again going to be diving deeper into this material around sacred embodiment, using ceremony and divination teachings, and temple dance, and really opening up the body and really working with, I think I mentioned a lot of my work has to do with dance and sacred dance, working up the energy systems to invite this higher consciousness literally into your cells. So I believe that was my last slide. Linda, I think that was my last slide. So thank you, everyone, so much. It's been an honor.
Okay, Shannon, thank you very much for an amazing presentation and for your great slides. They were really beautiful. And it was so lovely meeting you, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future.
I would love that. Thank you so much, Linda.
Excellent. Beautiful. Would you all please thank Shannon Gill, everyone?
Thank you so much. It was beautiful.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, great slides. That was awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate it, guys.